listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. Once again, thank you for joining us each and every week. Before we get started with this week's episode, just a few notes. I want to remind you guys about our Amazon campaign. That's right, if you go to our website, hazardground.com, and click on the Amazon banner right there in the middle of the homepage, you can actually help out veterans organizations. All you got to do your regular shopping as you normally would on Amazon, whether it's personal, whether it's business, whatever. Just click on that banner in the middle of the homepage of hazardground.com, take you directly to Amazon, do your shopping, and we get a portion of the proceeds of what you spend, and we donate that to one of the amazing veterans charities that you've heard here on the Hazard Ground Podcast. We're also excited to announce that we have made our first donation from this campaign to one of the organizations you heard here on the Hazard Ground. Because you guys have gone to hazardground.com, clicked on that Amazon banner, and spent enough money, we were able to make a donation to Merging Vets and Players. That's MVP, Merging Vets and Players, an organization that you'll hear more about coming up in this week's episode. Also want to remind everybody that you can still get 15% off on our sponsors page on both Combat Flip-Flops and Knife Country USA by using the code HAZARD1. So go to our sponsors page on hazardground.com, and Combat Flip-Flops and Knife Country USA will both give you 15% off at checkout by using the code HAZARD1. Don't forget to follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Keep up with what's going on the show. And now, on to this week's episode. Joining us this week on the Hazard Ground Podcast is a retired Army Sergeant First Class, 13 combat deployments overseas as part of the 75th Ranger Regiment, the historic 75th Ranger Regiment, now working with a dynamic, disruptive organization called MVP, Merging Vets and Players, one of the finest organizations and veterans organizations out there. He is Jeremy Tindell on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Jeremy, welcome. Good to talk to you, brother.
Hey, Mark, I appreciate you this morning having me on, and just getting ready to chat along and tell you my story.
Well, we're excited to hear it. And for background for those listening, Jeremy and I actually know each other fairly well, as we are both part of Merging Vets and Players, the Atlanta chapter here. And it's just an exciting organization. It's great to be a part of. Close ties with the NFL. If you haven't heard of it, people who know of MVP obviously know what they're all about, but certainly impacting and changing lives. But let's go all the way back to the beginning and start at the beginning of your career in the United States Army. How'd you get in? Why'd you sign up? And when'd you do it?
So I joined early in '98. At the time, I was working in a machine shop doing computer-aided machining. I was actually a subcontractor of Boeing making jet engine parts. So anybody out there that wants to be leery about flying on a plane, it might be something that I helped build. But yeah, so my family background was mainly Navy. I have a grandfather who spent 32 years in the Navy, and then my dad had did 6 years, actually prior to me even being born. But growing up in San Diego, California, I had a lot of Navy friends, and the stereotypical, hey, my dad's a Navy SEAL, that was part of my upbringing. So I knew a lot about the Navy and everything else growing up. And I wanted to do something different in my life. And this actually was constructed from a conversation that my grandfather and I had before he passed. And he said, you know, I did enough time for our entire family in the Navy. If you're ever going to join the service, do something that you're going to want to do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be driven towards the Navy. So I was fairly successful in the machining career, and I was getting bored of it. And I was almost 20 years old, so I hit up a recruiter and went, and 13 days later, I found myself joining the Army, dropped everything and headed to Fort Benning for one-site unit training out there. And I was on a contract to be an 11 Bravo straight leg infantryman heading to Hawaii. I was thinking
Nice.
I was going to the promised land.
What did your parents say, by the way? Because, I mean, it's a pretty dramatic career shoot. Did you talk to them about it ahead of time?
Yeah, I kind of blindsided them with it, and my personality, that's kind of how it is I just, I'll come up on a whim, And when I make my mind up, I'm dead set on it, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So, coming to my mom and dad, and I actually work with my dad in the machine shop, and I got with him one night on a swing shift, and I said, hey, I'm joining the Army. And he was just like, well, it was about time that this finally happened, because I knew it was going to eventually happen one day. And then he said, your mom's going to be pissed when she finds out. But
was she?
It just kind of happened. Oh yeah, absolutely. She was upset that I was going to be joining the Army and moving away. But later on in life, the pride of her son doing the things for our country and just serving, finally took its place.
We talked to a lot of vets on the pod who signed up after 9/11. You signed up before 9/11. Was your mom mad because you were just leaving home? I mean, it wasn't like at that time in 98, 99, there was any imminent threat of war. I mean, for crying out loud, we couldn't have been in a more peaceful place.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the 98 is around the time that Bosnia was starting to wrap up.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, there was no conflicts or anything going on. So, yeah, it was probably just the motherly upset that her son is taking that drastic move and going into the unknown that the military provides.
Now, why the infantry?
Well, it sort of came with the contract. So I was offered several different jobs.
You would think a machinist or a welder would have been at the top of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would figure, but it was more late on the line as Hawaii was being offered.
Ah, there you go.
So yeah, they the recruiters in the MEP station, they dragged me in on that one, and so things ended up changing, and my dynamic took a whole 180 while I was in basic training.
Okay.
So my mom actually has a friend who was married to a Army Master Sergeant at the time, and he was a West Point instructor. And after talking with my parents and finding out that I joined the military, he asked the probing questions. What's he doing? What MOS is he going into? And they found out that I was just going to Hawaii as a straight infantryman. And he said, your son would not want to do that. And so he used his channels and the powers that be, and through asking a series of questions on one of our 5-minute phone calls in basic training, I ended up telling him that the infantry training brigade commander was somebody that he had served with. And lo and behold, we're on our FTX. We're getting ready to wrap up infantry training, go get our blue cords. And my drill sergeant comes out and throws my mail at me. And he's screaming and cussing at me. Who the hell do you know, Private? And I was just like, what the hell is this dude's problem? And as he's telling me, when we get back from the FTX, we got to get you cleaned up because you're going to have lunch with the infantry training brigade commander. At the time was Colonel Abraham Turner. So, fast forward, get through the ruck march, we get our blue cord ceremony done up. And I go to the officers club on Fort Benning, the land of the unknown from those on Sand Hill. And the drill sergeant takes me over there, and I sit down, big, huge black gentleman, full Burt colonel, and he introduces himself, and he's like, I'm the ITB commander, Colonel Turner, and a friend of yours, Jim, that I'm really good friends with. We served together and taught in West Point together. Tells me that we need to have a talk. So I sat and I had lunch, and at the end of the lunch, the colonel was sliding amended orders to me to send me on to airborne school in and out to the 75th Ranger Regiment.
Wow. Now this is for those who aren't military, don't know, the 75th Ranger Regiment is the most elite, Ranger unit in all of the Army, and it's not an easy get. Like, there are guys who want to go there who jump through lots of hoops to get an assignment there after years of just being a regular infantryman. And so to get that as a private, it's a pretty big damn deal.
Absolutely. And then, further on in my career, which I'll touch a little bit on, even joining and enlisting in the Army, it's minimalized slots that are allocated for recruiters to give individuals coming into the Army for the 75th Ranger Regiment.
Right.
Usually comes with, some type of a bonus or whatever else, depending on the needs of the regiment. But after that, found myself in airborne school. And at the end of airborne school, it's like the gates of hell open up, and, Satan himself, in the form of 3 big burly men with black berets on at this time. The Army hadn't circumvented over to the black beret yet.
Right.
And these guys are approaching the formation after airborne graduation, and they just start yelling and screaming and cussing up a storm to get your shit and get next to the freaking the big Ryder box truck.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are, you're carrying all your stuff as a private, and everybody's in a frantic, don't know what the hell is going on. And you're thinking, all right, cool, I get to carry these 3 big duffel bags and throw them on this truck. Nope, that's not the issue. You get to run from airborne school to an unknown location, which is now the Ranger Indoctrination Program in 1998, and while carrying everything that you own. And so you have these big burly Rangers standing in the back of this open box truck, yelling and screaming at you, making you want to quit. And when you quit, you finally get to put your bags in the truck, and you're basically going to see your ass, going somewhere else other than going to the 75th.
Right.
So
now, you didn't know this.
Run.
You didn't know this going through it. So what's going through your mind?
Honestly, it's what the fuck did I get myself into?
But did you think about quitting? Did you ever think, what am I doing? Just take the damn bags. Where are we going? Kind of deal. Like almost practicality,
No. So a lot of my Ranger knowledge was improved throughout basic training because, through all the Army cadences, and we had Rangers that were in the infantry basic training as the drill sergeants. And most of our chain of command were all Rangers going through infantry training. They clued me in on what to expect, but I don't think I ever really had the notion of, man, I want to quit while I'm going through all of this.
Right.
And just knowing that at the end was that prestigious unit and what everything was talked about, the camaraderie, doing all the really high speed stuff and getting to shoot all the freaking guns in the Army's arsenal and getting to blow shit up. So it was the cool factor kind of took over for me, and knowing that was at the end of the line.
Gotcha. Okay. So obviously you don't throw your bags in the back of the truck. You don't quit. You go through Ranger Indoctrination Program. Kind of give me the next couple of steps of your career.
Okay. So get done with RIP and head straight over to Savannah, Georgia, and become a member of the 1st Ranger Battalion.
Okay.
From there, just the nonstop high intensity training that we would do, constantly going somewhere, constantly jumping into some type of training environment, and move up through the ranks. I tried my first attempt at Ranger School in April of '99, right after a 30-day rotation in JROTC down in New Orleans, Fort Polk, and ended up getting sent home in the second phase. There's really nothing I could do about it. But
was it injury?
Going back, no, it was through peer evaluations.
Gotcha. Okay.
So being a private, and it was a strong infantry officer basic course, heavy class.
Right.
So a lot of the new IOBC students were there, and so being a Ranger private. I had an entire squad of some IOBC cadets and one SF guy. So it was first my Ranger buddy, who was another PFC, and then myself got peered out in the second phase, and they sent us home.
Okay.
Go back about 13 months later, end up graduating in December of 2000, and get my coveted Ranger tab.
Okay, so now you're officially official inside the regiment.
Correct.
Must have been a good feeling.
It was, absolutely. Now I get to create the havoc that was put onto me and, do the stereotypical, I'm a tab specialist, tab spec 4, and, join those little mafias and smoking privates and kind of, doing the hazing thing is what everybody likes to call it. But, I mean, it's that rite of passage. You don't just go to a 75th Ranger Regiment and everything is, cakes and cookies. It's hard. It's meant to be hard, and it's meant to push everybody to that next level. Now, of course, I wasn't doing anything stupid, beating people with like broomsticks or whatever. But I mean, just the excessive amounts of exercise and everything else that was the typical smoke sessions that, we would put our guys through.
Fast forward, where are you on 9/11? What are you guys doing?
So I had recently gotten married about 6 months prior, and I was dropping my wife off at the Ranger Gym, and the majority of the battalion was spread out amongst Turkey Hungary area. One of the companies was off, and then another company was on another training deployment. So I was back in the rear because the very next day I was supposed to be going to then PLDC, Primary Leadership Development Course, which now is WLC.
Warrior Leader Course, yeah.
Right. So, I dropped my wife off at the Ranger Gym, just like our typical day. And then I was heading over to battalion headquarters to go to our operations and grab my PLDC orders. Walk into staff duty, and the staff duty and his runner were sitting there just in awe. And I was like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, do you seeing this stuff? And I was like, well, what movie are you guys watching? And they're like, no, this shit's live. And I was like, really? So I was sitting there watching, what North Tower got hit. And then right at that point, South Tower got hit. And, I'm sitting there witnessing the next plane crashing. And I said, oh, shit, I know what's going to happen now. Run down to the S3. I grabbed my orders, and I hauled ass back over to the Ranger Gym. And there's my wife, and she's just standing on a treadmill, bawling her eyes out. And she says, you guys are going to be leaving soon.
It's amazing that you knew that, even as a young E4 at the time.
Yep.
And your wife knew. I mean, I guess the whole world knew it. Not that it was that long ago. I mean, for crying out, we are coming up on 20 years here in a couple of years of this whole thing. God. But, yep. I mean, it just, as a 22-year-old kid, sometimes it's hard to grasp the gravity of what really goes on in the world. But you guys, with the op tempo that you train, obviously this was, being the tip of the spear, so to speak. You knew this is what was next.
Absolutely. And, it even resonated down into our families. I mean, you can't talk to any Ranger and their significant other without them saying, yeah, we knew exactly what you guys were going to be doing. I mean, my wife's sitting there watching it on the news in a Ranger Gym of all places, and just knowing her husband's lifestyle and what they train to do every day, she knew. You guys are the key. You're the key benefactors of what's about to happen, because our country obviously is being attacked, and we're going to go to war with somebody. Right.
So you end up in total on 13 combat deployments. How quickly do you get to your first one?
Okay, so my very first one, I actually ended up deploying with Alpha Company, 1st Ranger Battalion, as an attachment. So my seating into the NCO Corps kind of came removing me out of the infantry lineman's job. And I ended up, through my first sergeant, he said, hey, you're going to go be an NCO, but hey, we need you somewhere else in the battalion. So I ended up going to become an ammo guy. So I ended up doing that job for a little bit. And, one of my first sergeants said to me, he's like, hey, you're going to go and you're deploying. And I said, all right. So
did you know where?
Well, at the time, no. I mean, they were kind of giving little bits of intel around the middle of December. And then when everything was said and done, we packed up, and day after Christmas, 2001, we were getting on planes to head over.
Afghanistan, obviously.
Well, yeah, we knew we were going to Afghanistan, but we didn't know exactly where we were going to be. And they basically said, hey, when we get to where we're going, that's when we're going to tell you. And once we got in the air, that's when they said, hey, we're going to go to a remote location. We're not going to be actually in Afghanistan yet. And then we're going to be ripping out with 3rd Ranger Battalion.
Okay. And so your thought process here is what? Like, what are you thinking?
I was thinking at the time, I was kind of regretting the change of job, and that I needed to be in the line with my guys. But then again, I wouldn't be given the situation that I was in had I not left, because I was in Charlie Company 175 for the first years of my career, and then taking that move and going over to our HHC element to be an ammo guy. It changed a lot for me. It put me into a situation where here I am. We train every day to go to combat, and I'm getting to go to combat, be it as an ammo guy, be it as whatever. So, I mean, there was going to be opportunities told, hey, you're going to go up to the battlefield, and you're going to go on the front lines as much as you can, but it's going to be in a different capacity.
So clearly no fear then.
No.
Okay. Never once worried about what combat was going to be like. Never once thought about, the meeting your maker, so to speak, or any of that.
No, not really a fear. More of a kind of just anticipating what it was going to be like. I was more anxious because, I mean, some of my leaders had prior served in Panama and Grenada. So, I mean, getting to be raised by those Rangers that were in, conflict before, it was already understood. And the upbringing that we went through, yeah, it might have been torturous and it might have been hell and physically it hurt, but I knew the guy on the left and right, no matter where I am, I know I'm going to be good.
Okay. So you get on the ground in Afghanistan. What's the op tempo like? Again, it's early 2002, right? So you're on the ground. How much fighting are you seeing? What's going on?
So the remote location that we were at, there was zero fighting. Like we weren't even in the country of Afghanistan. We were in a remote island on an airstrip. It was our staging base basically. And we got there, and immediately all the 3rd Bat guys, they're talking about the experiences. Some of them chatting about jumping onto Objective Rhino, which happened in early October. And then just stories. So we immediately started pushing our elements up to do their relief in place. And so I had to get there and start changing out ammo and start counting and doing all that stuff. And I started getting antsy. It was like, when am I going to go? When am I going to go? So, a couple weeks had gone by, and then here I am. I'm finding myself, it's already March. And, that's when, our first casualties had actually taken place in the beginning of March for the Battle of Takugar.
All right. So, and Takugar is a battle we've talked a lot about here on the Hazard Ground. And obviously, if you go back and listen to Nate's self-story, Nate was a key player in the Battle of Takugar. But when you take those first casualties, does your view and your emotional mindset change about everything that's going on?
Yes.
How?
So I was actually a JOC NCO, Joint Operations Center NCO. And so I was constantly in our talk and in our JOC. And when all of the events with Neil Roberts went down, him falling out of the Chinook, the whole entire base and everything that we were on was alerted. So gathering up all of the command teams and everybody getting in their positions, and we're watching, live predator feed of all this stuff going down. And it was very interesting because I'm like, man, this is great. This is like a live action video, and I get to watch. And as the first chalk for the QRF of Rangers comes in, and it was like, all right, they're on the ground. It looks like everything's fine. And then you start seeing machine gun fire, and you see an RPG, penetrate the side of the Chinook. And luckily, it didn't blow up, your typical movie fashion. But I mean, Now all of a sudden the rotors are starting to wind down, and it looks like they're coming to a stop. And as Rangers are starting to exit the back of the aircraft, and then you see that moment in your life that it's like, oh shit, this is real. When it happens, that's when your whole perspective on life and everything, it just changes. Because as two Rangers are walking out, and then the third guy walks out, and he falls face first into the snow and then doesn't move, and you just your whole perspective changes, and then you fixate on that, and then now you're starting to reel. It's like, well, who was that? And of course, like casualty calling back and everything else starts to happen, and they try to keep close hold on information about that. But it definitely changes. Your emotions, everything take over in that instance. And I wasn't even on the hilltop, so I could only imagine what those guys are going through.
But what emotions are you feeling? So you watch the body fall, and you know it's somebody but you don't know who. I mean, is it, oh my God, or is it, I need to get up there? Is it like, what? Give me some of the emotions you're feeling.
Well, it's every bit of them. Yeah. Oh my God. Where is my kit? Why can't I get there? Why am I not there? I mean, just every emotion filling your body and your mind of who is it? Holy crap. What exactly happened? Where the hell is the enemy fire coming from that, engaged that person and got him? So, I mean, you're overwhelmed with the different emotions. And then definitely who is it? And then it's like just eating at you until you finally find out who it is. And then, come to find out that it's a guy that just a few months prior that you call a really good friend of yours, you're in PLDC with. And so, when they started broadcasting the names, and one of the first ones that came out was Mark Anderson. Mark Anderson, really great dude. He was one of our Tab Spec 4s. He was a machine gunner. And when he got shot up, he didn't even get to leave the aircraft. And then you're like, okay, well, then you get other names. And they say, Matt Commons. Okay, hey, the Ranger private got killed. That sucks. And then when you find out that one of the key team leaders on the ground, Brad Kroos, really good friend of mine, I had just been in PLDC, 2.5 months prior, or 3.5 months prior to this, and having a great time being Rangers in a conventional Army setting of PLDC, and just completely, dominating everything in that Army training. And now he's dead, and it's just like your heart just sinks.
When you watch that whole battle unfold, I mean, it was 20 hours. I mean, it was 20 straight hours of those guys stuck on that mountaintop in Afghanistan. I mean, did you stay for the whole thing? Did you watch the whole thing?
I was there from the time that they started alerting until the time that they freaking left that hill.
Okay. So when the initial, and shock isn't the right word, but when, after you realize bodies have fallen and your fellow brothers are their lives are lost, but you're continuing to watch this thing unfold, take me kind of through the progression of being able to watch that whole thing, because, they had made other attempts to try to get those guys off the mountaintop, and they were all unsuccessful, and eventually they made the decision, hey, we're not sending anybody else up there. You guys are just stuck until we can get some more air, which probably won't be until tomorrow morning, kind of deal. So as this thing is unfolding, what are you thinking and feeling?
Well, I mean, the first thing I thought was, why aren't we doing the things that we can to get people up there? And of course, this is maybe just an ignorance and not knowing all of the command decisions and how they're made, and their thought processes on it. And then the other ones too is, sometimes in those particular situations, your hands are tied. The capabilities of aircraft, I mean, they're at an altitude that are already pushing the limits of military helicopters, and we didn't really realize that at the time, because this is the very first instance that it's a major mountainous terrain, and we're already pushing the limits on aircraft getting them up there. But I mean, the whole perspective of that, getting to watch as, Neil Roberts, is initially on the ground and crawling around and trying to fight for his life. And then Chapman getting on the ground and him crawling around and throwing grenades, and then, them killing him. And then as the first shot gets on the hilltop and gets shot up, you see your Rangers buddies, getting killed. And then just hearing all the commotion of the battle unfold it was unreal. And then, the heroism too that was displayed that day. I mean, Nate Self and his Air Force tactical advisor, Kevin Vance. I mean, unbelievable. This dude, he's calling in F-16s, F-15s, and dropping 500-pound bombs like within danger close. And danger close, I mean, it was always that given rule, don't call in bombs this close, but he was doing amazing things that day. And I really think that he saved everybody else that was still alive on that hilltop that day.
Wow. When you think back to that, what stays with you the most?
Well, I mean, being that I'm at my house and we're talking about this whole thing, I look on the Battle of Takugar, the rendering that Don Stivers had done, and it just every day it's with me. So it depicts the F-15s flying over and dropping JDAMs, and the casualty on the ground, and you got the ETAC behind a rock calling in the fire, and you got guys moving to contact, and you got guys taking a bunker. I mean, every bit of it is all depicted in this one portrayal, and every day I live it.
So when that deployment ends and you go back home and you're down 3 of your brothers, what's that feeling like? I mean, are you happy? I mean, obviously you're happy to be home, but you've left something behind.
Well, the first one is, hey, we're glad that we're coming home, and we don't think that this is going to ever have to, turn into something else. And the hopes that us being relieved by 2nd Ranger Battalion, that this would be it. We'd catch whoever, catch Osama bin Laden at the time, and we'd be done and over with. Never in a million years would any of us would have think, hey, this is going to go on for the next 18 years.
Yeah.
And having, I would probably say 15 or 50% of the Ranger Regiment having at least 6 deployments, to each person, and an even smaller portion having multiple, like 10 or 15. It just it carries on and on. But being home and being back with family and everything else, it was great. But then that thing in the back of your mind is, we have one more thing that we got to do, and that was having our memorial. So putting the entire battalion into a chapel in downtown Savannah, and having the ceremony and everything, it was just it's that last thing in your mind that you don't ever want to do, because within the Ranger Regiment, when we have a fallen comrade, he's memorialized for the rest of their lives that they gave within our lives. So we call him our Airborne Ranger in the Sky. Well, for mine, when I first got to the battalion, it was James Markwell, and he was a PFC that got killed in Panama. And, every day it was like, I'm doing an extra push-up for my Airborne Ranger in the Sky, or, everything was to pay homage to the Airborne Ranger in the Sky. Well, now one of my good friends is my Airborne Ranger in the Sky. And that was something that was very hard to swallow at first.
Did you break down at any point? I mean, did you cry during the memorial service? Did it all come out, or is this something that took you years to kind of really face?
Yeah, up front. I mean, most everybody does. I know I did. I'm an emotional person, so I mean, I did. Well, on several occasions.
And I ask you that. I mean, you and I know each other, for those listening. So you and I have shared some emotional thoughts and some stories together, personal things that we've both been through. And so, I feel like I can ask you that without any reservation. But, for those listening, we have talked to people who just, they get kind of in this zone and they block everything out and they don't face the emotions, and it all kind of resurfaces later on down the road. And, we've touched on a little bit how much still stays with you, but go back to those moments when you were going through all that. Was it as tough then as it is now?
It's tough every day. It was as tough losing them up front, and then, finally realizing in our theater memorials that we did, it was very tough. It was very emotional. I wish I knew how some of these guys can, desensitize themselves from it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, because, do you just have like no heart at all, or are you just so used to seeing death or being around it that you've kind of just, desensitized yourself? That's a mystery to me. But yeah, I have an emotional heart, and losing those guys, it was a tough time for me. And then, of course, going on later on, through deployment 2, deployment 3, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, deployment 4, and then here we are. I think it was like my 5th or 6th deployment, and we hadn't lost anybody. Now, we sustained some casualties. That guys, take some bullet wounds. Good friend of mine, Lee Crouch, he got shot through his hip, and we thought that he was gonna die, but luckily we have the best trained medics that the Army could put together, and they saved his life. But then our next casualty comes around, and it's like, man, here it is all over again. And then you go another deployment, and then now there's another casualty, and then you start thinking, what is it that we're doing wrong? Or is the enemy just getting that much better? Because for a while there, the Taliban and all that stuff in Afghanistan, there wasn't a whole lot of intense engagements. So they must have like consolidated and done some kind of like train up or whatever, and increased their abilities against us. Because then, the eventual, we started taking more casualties, and now that we know it, we're like 6 casualties deep, 8 casualties deep. Now we're 10 casualties deep. So those emotional moments are finding its way into 1st Ranger Battalion quite often.
Do you get frustrated? I mean, do you feel like at some point in time where the losses are too much to bear?
Yeah, at times, and at times it's the frustration turns into, why are we still here? Why are we still doing all this?
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of clouding what is the real mission of being here.
Talk to me about the invasion of Iraq that you were part of, differences between Afghanistan. What was it like? Because, as much as the common individual says, oh, it's the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, it's all the same. They are vastly different places and vastly different battles in the way that you fight, just mostly because of the terrain. But what was your role in the invasion?
So at that time, I had actually circumvented back over to Charlie Company, 1st Ranger Battalion, and I was still in a ammo capacity, and then I also took on other jobs because we didn't have any chemical guys. A lot of the infantry line units, they're self-sustained. If you don't have a particular MOS, you get an infantry guy to fill it in. So unfortunately, I got thrown as a chemical guy as well. So I'm having to put together all the chemical suits because the fear of WMDs and the knowledge of Saddam Hussein using chemical warfare in the past, it was real. And
yeah, it was real going in. Funny how after we got there, we realized that was the furthest thing from any of the threats that we were going to deal with in the course of nearly 9 years of war there. Everybody,
exactly.
Both deployments I went to Iraq, you brought your chemical stuff. It was packed in a tough box, and you never took it out once, and then you turned it back in when you got back. It never once came into play.
Oh, it was worse for us because we're in a remote location at an airfield, and every day it's like we're wearing our chemical suit instead of wearing our desert BUs. And so a lot of our guys, just having to wear that suit day in and day out, it was like, okay, these are getting nasty. I don't think these are effective suits anymore. But that was our daily wear. Right. Because we were thinking, hey, this threat is imminent and it's going to happen. And then it never does.
Right.
But yeah, the differences of Iraq and Afghanistan were very, very different. You get to Afghanistan, 3rd Ranger Battalion had already been there. And so things were set up. Internet capabilities, some phone capabilities were established. So you get there and it's like, well, I can jump on the internet and I can check emails and I can send it, hey, I love you, nothing OPSEC, nothing where you're at. And I can, provide some communication with my new wife. Get to Iraq. Yeah, it was like 110 days. And then I finally get an opportunity to take, one of our cell phones that we travel with and make a quick phone call and say, hey, I'm coming home in like a couple days. I can't tell you exactly when, but I'll be home soon. And to hear your wife crying on the other end of the line, it's like, you've been gone for 110 days, no communication whatsoever. And it's like, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of a desert.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, quite different.
Tell me about July 19th, 2003. You were not in a combat zone, but you sustained a, life-threatening injury.
Yeah, so the typical Ranger fashion, if you're not deployed in combat, you're training as if you're in combat. So elements of Charlie Company, 1st Ranger Battalion, we went to South Africa. Went and did a 30-day rotation to train with the South African National Defense Force. And, we're doing live fire exercises and everything with them. And July 19th came up. We were supposed to do a foreign wings exchange where we either jump with their equipment and their instruction, and we do a combined effort. And we jump in and everybody changes out wings. They get American-style jump wings, and then we get South African jump wings. So we were jumping their aircraft, their chutes, and their jump masters were pushing us out the door. I'm the first bird, and I am the last jumper on the left door. And when I exit the aircraft, I immediately get into an entanglement with another jumper.
Oh, man.
And so I'm completely entangled in some suspension lines. We're riding one canopy down to the ground, and I come in basically backwards in a type of an L shape. And I smacked my ass and broke my lower back. Come to find out that, normal rate of descent is like 20, 22 feet per second. We were close to 80 at the time of impact from what the drop zone survey team was telling us.
Did you know the guy you were entangled with, or he was a South African guy?
No, he was one of our riggers that was attached to us at the time.
Okay. Did you feel like when you were entangled, did you know on the way down, like, this is going to end up bad?
Not until the last couple seconds. I was trying to do the airborne school technique of, riding myself and working myself down to the lower jumper if you're too entangled. But we were jumping into some pretty nasty weather. It was like 25 and 35 mile an hour gusts. We were jumping into a valley, so it was just that much more amplified. And the weather and everything just made it horrible. And then my reserve parachute had ended up deploying, and it got wrapped around my legs, and that's why I ended up, in an L shape, because my reserve parachute actually pulled my legs out in front of me.
Ah, okay. All right. Makes sense.
So I ended up in a hospital for about 9 days there in South Africa, and then I flew home with the main body element, and took a couple of years to recover from it.
What were your injuries?
So I sustained several compression fractures of my vertebrae. I think I crushed my T10, 11, and 12 vertebrae and bulged a bunch of my discs.
Man.
Yeah.
When that happened, did you think that your career in the military was over?
I knew right then it was over.
How hard was that to deal with?
I still to this day fight it. It didn't remove me from the 75th Ranger Regiment right away. I can't say enough how much I thank the command team at the time. All my command teams. I mean, my battalion commander and command sergeant major. Commander was Colonel Mike Kershaw at the time, and Sergeant Major Harold Hance. They come by the hospital almost daily, and their drivers, they'd come in, they'd say, "Hey, whatever Tindell wants, get it for him." And of course, I didn't want to eat the bullshit mutton that they had in our hospital, so they would go in the local pop and they would, grab McDonald's or whatever and bring it back because their food over there is horrible. But having your battalion command team that's over there with you show up and show their concern that you were injured on a daily basis was pretty overwhelming. And then, my command team at the time, it was Captain Jack Rich and First Sergeant Mike Ferrucci, who was he's a sergeant major for the 82nd Airborne right now, moving up to I Corps. They're just as great. And they sat me down after we got home and, "Hey, we're going to get you in physical therapy. We're going to take care of you. Oh, and don't worry, you're not leaving. We're going to take care of you first and then figure out from there." It moved me into my next job, which for my therapy portion of my career, they moved me over to one of the S shops. I worked in the Intel shop, and I did admin stuff. And I got engrossed with a lot of people. I met all the brand new Rangers and stuff coming to the battalion every month. Just getting to know everyone, which then in turn landed me into the job that I ended up retiring out of the Army as. So I ended up changing my MOS after that injury because I knew I wasn't going to be a good infantry ranger anymore. Sergeant Major at the time, Chris Hardy, he had offered and said, "Hey, we're losing our career counselor, and you've been here almost 7 years. You know a lot of people. You got a lot of good rapport with everybody. We'd like to offer you a job." At the time, I was looking at getting out of the Army, and a couple of job offers coming in to get some really good money. But I didn't want to give up my career because at the end of a career, I knew there was like the golden ticket, that, hey, I got to get a retirement check for the rest of my life.
Right. My
family and I will have health care, until we die. So, there was that I was looking forward to after having a 32-year veteran of the Navy and my grandfather. My grandmother turns 100 on March 1st, and she still lives off of my grandfather's military. Yeah. So, I know the benefits at the end of the road, and I didn't want to give it up. So he gave me a 2-week little hiatus to kind of just piggyback with the career counselor who was a friend of mine at the time. And Kyle and I, we sat down and he said, "Hey, I'm going on to be a warrant officer. I really think that, you'd be the best fit for this." So I took it on. I ended up re-enlisting for 6 years. And the sergeant major was like, "All right, well, we're going to take care of you even more. You're going to go overseas, and we're going to give you an opportunity to re-enlist overseas so you can get your money tax-free." And I was like, "Well, shit, that's even better." So, yeah, I jump on a rotator over to Afghanistan. I hang out for a little while. I get to re-enlist. I get my bonus tax-free. I come home. I take on my new venture, and from there, I stayed in the battalion for a few more years, and then not being known in the conventional Army on the career counselor side, One of my mentors in the career counselor field said, "You got to get out in the big Army, man, because nobody knows you. It's awesome that you do real great things in the Ranger Regiment, but if you're ever wanting to get promoted to the next level, you got to go out and you got to expand your portfolio and go to the big Army." So, which I did.
Was it hard to leave the regiment?
Yes.
Why?
Because that was my livelihood. It was my day in and day out. There was never a time that I wasn't saturated around my Rangers. I even still to this day, even though I've been removed from the Ranger Regiment for over a decade, I still connect. I mean, even last night at our Emerging Vets and Players event, I meet a guy from 3rd Ranger Battalion, and we were just going down the line. "Oh, do you know this guy? Hey, do you know this guy? Oh, man, I grew up under this guy. Holy shit, you know this guy." And it's just like I have to stay connected with Rangers, or I don't have any meaning in my life anymore.
You know, the years you spent in the regiment, you characterize as the absolute best, but, worst moments are there. How do you balance that? How do you stay happy about the best moments, and what do the worst moments do to you?
Well, I mean, I just, like I said, I stay saturated with my guys, in any way, shape, or form that I can. I live in Augusta, Georgia, and I created a Ranger / Special Forces breakfast, that we throw on every once in a while. Anytime that I, can go to a special event and give tickets away, the first people I'm calling is my Ranger buddies. So, I mean, just staying engaged with them. I'll give a text to a guy just out of the blue and be like, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" Just to stay connected. But the bad times, I mean, everybody has KIA bracelets. So, I mean, if you just give it the time to reflect and think about it and not let it overwhelm you, it's easier to deal with than instead of, letting it bottle up and then just one day kind of exploding inside you and then just completely overwhelming you. So I like I said, I reflect on Taco Gar every day of my life because it's in my living room on my wall. And I pay homage to these guys every day.
Do you stay in touch with some of their families?
So one of the family members that I do stay connected with, actually has a little bit of significance in my household. So June 1st, 2010, Ranger Doc John Penny, he was killed. Well, during the same time frame that he was leaving this world, I was bringing my daughter into this world. And so just the thought of my daughter being born on the same day that a Ranger buddy that I knew, it impacts me. But his mom, she does a lot of great things within our community and within the Gold Star community. So I stay in touch with her as best as possible. Just numerous Rangers that stay in touch with her. But Sue Penny is one that I do touch base with on occasions just to keep up that interaction.
All right, let's transition to Emerging Vets and Players, and that's how you and I ended up getting connected. MVP, as it's shorthand known, was created by Jay Glazer, who is a NFL insider analyst for Fox Sports, and Nate Boyer, who is also a guest on the Hazard Ground podcast. I think he was our 3rd or 4th guest ever, actually, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. But you can go back and listen to that episode as well. But Nate is well known for his work with Colin Kaepernick on the kneeling during the anthem, and he's gone on to other things in Hollywood. He's big time now. But anyway, so Nate and Jay created this organization because they saw the commonality in people transitioning out of the military and athletes transitioning out of their playing careers back into normal life. And you realize that, there's a lot of similarities between the two. And so Emerging Vets and Players was born. They currently have 4 chapters across the United States, one of them here in Atlanta. And I was fortunate enough to be brought in on the opening of that. And you and John Sterling, the chapter coordinator here in Atlanta, have just built just an amazing, incredible weekly meeting that we all get together for. I'll let you talk more about it and how you got involved with it. But certainly, this is just a dynamic organization from top to bottom.
Yes. So merging vets and players, I ultimately think that this is a type of environment, and this is an organization that any combat veteran, they need to find, and they need to start getting to be a part of. And not only because I have a biased opinion and a direct connection with it, but being part of the demographic, I have issues and I have problems, talking about losing, Ranger buddies and stuff like that. It gets me. I don't let it take over my life, but it does. It gets me from time to time. And being around people that I can talk with those particular moments in my life where, I might be feeling down or whatever in that setting, it helps. But being able to collaborate with NFL players, and it's not just NFL, we've expanded, and it's now all athletes. Anybody with a professional athlete, they had an identity once in their lifetime. Just like when you're in the military, you have an identity, and then you take off the uniform. Now you have to circumvent into a different lifestyle and transition into that new identity. Well, being in special operations, being a member of the elite 75th Ranger Regiment, I had to take off my identity. And for a while, I had to struggle with it because now I'm in the conventional Army where a lot of people, it just seems to be apparent that nobody really cares as much to be on the elite level. Now, I mean, they do have great care of being in the service, but, going from the elite down to just a conventional Army, it was a huge eye-opener. But merging vets and players, the similarities that combat veterans and professional athletes have, there's trauma similarities. There is emotional similarities. They even have types of trauma as far as being referred to as PTS. So it's a very similar lifestyle, and it's a very similar transition. When they leave on good terms, and they also leave on bad terms. They leave on very emotional terms, just like in the military. You get in an accident like I did, and it ends your career. Guys in the NFL, guys in the NBA or whatever, they get a major injury, they lose their career. Now they lose their identity. So there's struggles with it, and that's why we come together. We get in an MMA environment, and we do a workout, and we sweat together, and then we get in a little fireside chat, and we just talk about our issues and our problems. And then we have programs that we either associate with or that are in the room to help develop those people and get them in the relationships they need to get over it.
And for those, who haven't had the opportunity to be part of it, it's inspiring. It's humbling. It's amazing how you can get into a room with another veteran and it's like a security blanket. It's like a comfort. It's one thing if you're in the grocery store and you're bumping into somebody who happens to be a veteran. You just, hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you. But when you get in that environment and people are there to share their experiences, there's an immediate connection. Like you can't deny it. I felt it from the very first meeting that we had here in Atlanta, and every week I've shown up, it's the same thing. It's just great to shake hands and hug somebody and say, hey man, hey girl, I'm here for you. We're all on the same team still. We're all fighting the same fight, and you and I have shared some of that.
No, absolutely. Getting around some of these individuals that they've been keeping that feeling or that emotion bottled up. I mean, we had one individual. It took 25 years for them to open up about a traumatic event in their life and how significant it was negatively impacting their life. And then to come in and to share that one with complete strangers, but those complete strangers are a very welcoming, embodiment of what they are. And that is a veteran themselves or a fellow athlete themselves. So, I mean, it's inspiring being in a room when on the very first instance, you can meet somebody and they open up like that. Or on the other token is you can be around a professional athlete And on the very first time of them being in the room, they can say, you know what? I've been given an opportunity and I won particular accolades. So I'm going to take and I'm going to donate those accolades to this organization being the very first time of being here, instead of taking it and giving it to my own organizations that I'm, already engaged with. So, I mean, there's lots of inspiration that happen in the room, and it's on a daily basis. I mean, last night, we had a gentleman overcome some shortcomings in his life, and just seeing how he perked up on a small victory that he's gone over is just, it's all inspiring.
It really is, and I can't say enough about emerging vets and players. And, one of the big things, and I've said this about the organization, it's a lifestyle choice now. Like it's me being at those meetings every Tuesday and those workouts that we do together. It keeps me centered, it keeps me focused. There's a second family there of people that need you and you need them. It's kind of parasitic in that sense, but in a good way, I mean. Absolutely.
And we expand that by, we give achievements. There's rites of passage within the MVP environment. Like last night, we were able to give our very first participant, Mark Zino, his first rite of passage within the MVP program, and that was the T-shirt that was earned. But I mean, there's those small achievements throughout to keep people engaged and to hopefully keep impacting their life and drawing them back in to be with us, because we're in it for life. I mean, this is basically a new family for everybody.
Well, Jeremy, listen, I mean, what you've went through in your career, obviously, we could spend another hour easily cataloging everything about your deployments and everything that you've done, but certainly the transition you made throughout your career and then the post-transition into not only retirement, but, being part of emerging vets and players. It's a fantastic story, brother. I love diving a little bit more. You and I have gotten a chance to talk a lot, but hearing you kind of recount your military career certainly gives me a newfound appreciation for everything that you've done. So I certainly, appreciate all your candor and honesty, brother.
All right, Mark, I appreciate it, man.
Jeremy Tindell, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thanks, bud.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.